We're going to talk about the history and connections of the indigenous people to the place, and also look at the knowledge that has been documented in stone. And then we're going to talk about how this place became a national monument, and some of you were involved with that process. This year we celebrate 35 years as being designated by legislation as a national monument. And we'll talk about also some of the challenges we're facing as the West Mesa continues to grow. Let's begin by talking about the creation of the landscape around us here in New Mexico. Millions of years ago, it was a lot different out on the landscape. There were oceans, inland seas. The earth was uplifting. There were volcanoes. There were tectonic forces at work. The Sandia Mountains began forming about 25 to 30 million years ago, when the tectonic forces caused the Earth's crust to shift. The Sandia Fault lifted and rose sharply above the surrounding area. As the Sandia uplifted, the Rio Grande Rift was formed. The Earth's crust stretched, and large blocks of land dropped between the fault lines, creating what we see on the landscape today. Ooh. As the Earth's crust stretched, lava flows occurred across the state. Now I can't see anybody though. I love having at least somebody out there. Thank you. A little bit, yeah, maybe a little, I don't know.
Somewhere in between.
Somewhere in between, but whatever, we'll work with it. There was volcanic activity across the state. New Mexico is one of the most volcanic states there is in the country, outside of Hawaii. And as the Earth's crust stretched, fissures were formed along the West Mesa. And these fissures resulted in 6 different lava flows that capped the landscape, of the West Mesa with basalt. This eruption occurred about 150 to 200,000 years ago and formed what we now call the Albuquerque volcanoes. But they're not typical volcanoes. They're not a volcano that is like a shield volcano that blows its top. What you actually see out on the landscape are just piles of the basalt that were left after that eruption. So there's no crater out there. There's just piles of rocks across the landscape. But what a landscape it is. As the volcanic eruptions occurred, the basalt traveled across the West Mesa, as far north as Piedras Marcadas Canyon, and as far south as Mesa Prieta. For years and years and years, the volcanic eruptions occurred. After the lava cooled and capped that sediment, erosion started to occur over thousands of years. The rocks started tumbling down. The basalt aged and weathered and got a desert patina on it, and it formed what we now see as our current escarpment that you can see as you're flying in from anywhere you're going. You can look out across I-25, point out the West Mesa, the escarpment. It's a very visual part of our landscape here in Albuquerque. As all this was happening, life was forming on Earth. And scientists tell us about 40,000 years ago, the first humanoids appeared on the landscape. But Native people have a different origin history that they've shared with us. It's different among the different groups, but there are some commonalities. And something that's common is the idea of emergence from the underworld into the present world. And that emergence was a heroic and great journey full of trials, full of challenges that led them to have a really deep understanding of their connections with the land. The act of coming to the surface from the underworld signifies a return to the earth with the recognition of how important those connections are from the spiritual world to the sacred landscapes that we see today. So we know that the people emerged from the underworld, and we know the first evidence of human life on the landscapes around New Mexico was shown in places like the Clovis site and in places like White Sands National Park, where there's footprints preserved on the landscape. But at Petroglyph, the markings on the stones may tell that origin story. They show the connections and the roadmap from the underworld to the surface world. Some say these carvings show the pathways, the spirals that you see out on the rocks, the connection of, let's see if this will work. Yeah, the horizon, the night, the morning star, and the pathway out of the underworld tells the emergence stories. For thousands of years, indigenous people thrived across the landscape of what is now the North America. And around the Southwest, ancestral Pueblo, Navajo, Apache have lived here. Neighboring tribes moved through the area, whether it was for warring purposes, raiding purposes, or just exploring different areas. All developing a deep connection to the land through spirituality, respect, and sustainability. At Petroglyph, evidence shows connections with 29 different indigenous tribes of the Southwest, who still consider it a sacred site. All of the Pueblos of New Mexico, tribal people from as far away as Texas, Oklahoma, and Arizona. In some cases, the petroglyphs in the archaeological site out at the monument are the only remnants of this early Pueblo occupation in the area. 20,000 petroglyphs, hundreds of archaeology sites, give us insight to the lives of these people. Petroglyph was a place of community. Archaeological evidence shows us that people came to the monument to work, to camp, to hunt, to farm, and to worship. We see images in stone reflecting their lives carved on rocks. Most of the carvings that we see at the monument are between 500 and 700 years old, but there are ones that go back 1,000 or more years. We see carvings that reflecting the importance of the area to them. Carvings portraying life, death, and birth are all contained within the monument. We also see evidence of their human occupation carved in stone, showing what appears to be structures and connections to places like the Rio Grande, the mountain, showing things like rain and weather, showing connections to their home, which was probably in one of the villages along the Rio Grande. You may not be aware, but part of Petroglyph National Monument is a Pueblo site that is located along the Rio Grande. It's a place where Native people were directly connected to the landscape. This is a representation of what it looked like. This site was about 1.5 miles east of the Piedras Marcadas Canyon, connected by an arroyo. So it's probable that the people at this site were very much connected to Petroglyph because they were able to travel up that arroyo very easily. The estimated date of occupation of that site was about from 1300 to the first European contact with the Coronado expedition around 1540. Occupation may have lasted out there until the 1600s. The area was inhabited for nearly 300 years, which is kind of amazing. It had approximately 1,000 rooms, several kiva, and an unknown number of subterranean structures. About 2,000 people lived at this site. But today, you don't see anything out there but rolling hills and some vegetation. But Dr. Matt Schmader, who you probably know if you've been around archaeology for a while, has done extensive research on the site, and he's found evidence of a major battle with Coronado on this site. Today, the Pueblo just appears as some low risers, but we've been able to do some ground penetrating radar and determine what it looked like, and thus the model that we showed you. But it's preserved as an archaeological site with no public access at the request of the tribes, and it's also never been excavated. In spite of all the work, all the plowing that has gone on in the Rio Grande Valley, this place was saved. So it is probably one of the best representations of a Pueblo village that's unexcavated in the entire Rio Grande Valley. From the Pueblo site and from other places around the Southwest, people made their way to the monument. And the petroglyphs show us that people had a deep connection with the land. We know that they came to this area to hunt. We have found archaeological evidence of hunting and campsites across the playas of the West Mesa. These are remnants of dry lake beds, but there used to be water out there. And people and game animals would gather around these playas. And we found a reliable source of water always attracts people and animals, and archaeologists for some reason. So we've been able to find some really amazing resources out there. And the petroglyphs actually show us that hunting did occur out there. The game animals that used to be present in the monument include pronghorn, deer, there might have been a bear, bobcat, badgers. So the people were out doing sustainable hunting, gathering, to ensure the long-term health of the land. They would rotate their hunting grounds, and they showed their hunting grounds by their carvings. Indigenous people were also able to cultivate a great range of crops in not only at the monument, but in other places in the valley. But what's interesting at the monument is certain plants were planted around spiritually significant sites, like desert tobacco. We see it around groupings of petroglyphs, and when we talk to the indigenous people that visit the monument, they tell us that it was planted there on purpose, because it is part of their ceremony. We also have plants that were used by Native people, such as the yucca. The yucca was used, almost every part of it was used, from soap, from the roots. They wove baskets and sandals out of the fronds, and they made clothes out of it. They also used cactus, four-winged saltbush, wild rhubarb, for medicine, for food, and all these plants are still in the desert landscape of the monument. The people knew how to thrive in the harsh climate, which is something that I would not be good at if you left me alone out in the resources there. They documented their use and importance in stone, like this carving of a yucca frond. One thing that I've learned that I really find interesting is that the Pueblo people are credited with developing terraced farming in North America. And if you've been to the escarpment, you know what kind of terrain it is. But they actually went out to the escarpment and flattened areas to pool water so they could grow crops out there. There's evidence that they were diverting water into certain places that if you look at it, it just looks like a row of rocks on the landscape, but there are actually water diversion structures in the monument. And we found evidence of corn pollen out there as well. And they were growing the Three Sisters. They were growing not the corn that we know of today, but mini corn and squash and beans. And these practices maintained a rich biodiversity in the area. And we actually have a petroglyph that looks suspiciously like corn, where I put the arrow on it because it takes you a while to see it, get your eyes used to seeing it, but it really looks like they were documenting the agriculture at the time. I will say firsthand, we don't know the meaning of the petroglyphs. We have a movie at our Visitor Information Center that Dr. Matt Schmader is in, and he said he, at one point in time, asked a tribal elder if they mind us trying to interpret the petroglyphs. And they say, well, go ahead, do whatever you feel is right, but you'll probably get it wrong anyway. So just take it with, you'll go out with anybody on a tour, you'll go out with Indigenous people and talk about the petroglyphs. And sometimes you'll be with two different groups. I'll be out with the Zuni and I'll be out with the Hopi, and they'll have completely different interpretations of petroglyphs. But a common theme is that they use the rock carvings to pass on knowledge. And one of the things that I find that is interesting is how many petroglyphs document animal life in the monument. They document the evidence of birds that they saw at the time. They document the evidence of wildlife. We have a lot of four-legged creatures, a lot of snake petroglyphs across the petroglyph that show what kind of wildlife was there. And they also document really important things like the macaw. Now, we don't have any natural macaw up here, but this is the information I was told is that the women would travel to Central America, and they didn't have horses then, so they would be on a long journey, and they would bring back macaw in cages, and then they would be charged with taking care of the macaw because their feathers were used for ceremonial purposes, and they still use the feathers today. And I had never heard that story about the women being the caretakers of the macaw, so may or may not be true, but that's part of the information I was told. But they document those connections, and even at the monument, you'll see some that portray live macaws, and some that portray macaws on their back that didn't successfully make the journey. We also have a number of elements that appear to point to different places. People ask me, are there eclipse markers or are there solstice markers? Well, we haven't done a comprehensive study on that, but there's claims that there are solstice markers in the monument, but we definitely have things that point to places, and whether they're pointing to places like Chaco, Mount Taylor, Mesa Verde, the Rio Grande, there are some directional elements that are part of the petroglyphs. And then we have history of the wars and battles that occurred, whether it was different tribes coming in and battling the Pueblo people, but they're documented, and you can see this guy has an arrow right through his head. And this guy is carrying a giant club. So that's pretty cool, I think. Now, I've also heard that this is documenting, there was a group of elders that would swallow arrows. I've heard that is another story, but I'm not sure. I understand from a certain tribe that was documenting war. Yeah, there are arrow swallowers. Yeah, interesting. And then we have the spiritual practices across the region, where we see evidence of the importance of the native culture's spiritual sites. We see shaman figures that appear to be guarding canyon entrances, so we don't know their meanings, but you can see this guy. If you're really good, you can spot some bear claws and giant bear feet, and very shaggy arms. And then one of the things that we have a lot of are masks and shields that are Kachinas. And the Kachinas are their ancestors that have since passed. And so we know these are very important sites for the tribal people. And then we have archaeological sites that suggest that there are shrines and ceremonial places. So for thousands of years, the Native people not only survived, but they thrived in this area. They didn't actually occupy and live at Petroglyph, but they left evidence of camps, of fires, of hunting, of rituals, and so the escarpment became a critical place for them. And then When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, everything changed. The Spanish weren't prepared for this environment, but they did bring new technologies, they brought agricultural practices, and religious influences. This forever altered the world of the indigenous people. It marked a period of profound transformation that affected the physical environment, but also the indigenous peoples who had lived here for thousands of years were greatly affected. But what's interesting to me is in the carvings at Petroglyph, they documented the arrival of the Spanish people. This is one of the first petroglyphs recorded of a horse and a horseback rider. And you can even see he has a switch. And he's wearing a nice hat, right? Likely a Spanish horseback rider. One of the most lasting effects that the Spanish had on New Mexico's landscape was the introduction of agriculture and introduction of livestock. Horses in particular played a huge role for the Spanish. It allowed them to get places a lot faster than walking, and it transformed the way people interacted with the landscape. And the indigenous people found that horses were really a lot easier than walking as well. So it transformed their lives in a great way. The other thing that happened was the Spanish claimed land. Now the indigenous people had their pueblo sites in their villages, but their notion of claiming land was different than our notion of claiming land. That's a very European notion. And the Spanish came in and developed this land grant system. And the land grant that is most associated with Petroglyph is the Etrusco Grant, which was a huge land grant just south of the volcanoes, which is currently a part of the monument. But these land grants were places where there was agriculture, there was ranches that were Spanish run, and they displaced the native people that had camped there or used it as hunting grounds. And then they brought in their agriculture, which was a profound change to the native people's culture. Sheep and cattle were across the landscape, including in Petroglyph National Monument, documented by petroglyphs of sheep, which is really cool. Sheep became an important source of wool, and cattle became an important source of leather, meat, and hides, which not only changed the indigenous people's lifestyle, but it helped New Mexico's economy, so it was a great thing. And across the landscape, the Spanish built roads. They had wagons, they built acequias, they had farms, and some of these roads are still present. And this is one of the historic roads that's located within Petroglyph National Monument. The Spanish settlers brought their culture, their religion, their language, and social systems to New Mexico, which led to a blending of Spanish and indigenous cultures, but not all the indigenous people were happy about that, right? So there was the Pueblo Revolt that took place, and that allowed the Pueblos to continue to practice their religion, but many of them converted to Catholicism, Christianity. They built churches, they established religious practices, they went the Spanish and they absorbed the indigenous people into their missions, and it's all documented on the West Mesa. This is an interesting one because it's a church with a cross with a person's face on it. The Spanish saw that the indigenous people were carving on the rocks, and they decided that would be a good idea. So they started carving on the rocks as well. You can tell the difference between the Spanish carvings and the native carvings because in Spanish generally use metal tools for carving, so they're much cleaner. So this might be more of an indigenous carving, but you look at this here and it's very clean, very solid lines. We suspect that is a carving by a Spanish person. That's in the monument. And I said I was out at El Morro. If you've ever been out to El Morro, the Spanish carvings in that sandstone are beautiful. Sandstone's a lot easier to carve on than basalt. But yes, the Spanish left their mark across the landscape as well. Perhaps the biggest impact that the European involvement, the Spanish had on the indigenous communities was the influence of disease and illness that resulted in huge crashes of indigenous populations across the Southwest, throughout New Mexico and beyond. And it really changed the culture of this area. It changed the indigenous people's lives forever. But they're still here. They survived, and they survive today. And they utilize petroglyph as sacred. And for years they continued to come to Petroglyph, to visit, to pray, to respect the escarpment and the areas of the West Mesa. It's not just the petroglyphs, but they are connected to the rocks. They're connected to the arroyos. They're connected to the plants of the monument. And it was very important for their history, their tradition, and their ceremonies to come out and utilize the area of the West Mesa. But unfortunately, not everybody respected this place. As Albuquerque grew, so did the damage that was occurring on the West Mesa. Irreplaceable sites were being destroyed. There were actually people using the petroglyphs as targets when they shot for training. Even the military came out and used the petroglyphs for target shooting. They took rocks from the monument. They used them in construction projects and landscaping. They used them for flood control. They scratched or destroyed the images, forever damaging these sacred resources. Roads and housing developments were being constructed around the escarpment, even to the very base of the escarpment. In 1973, in an effort to protect a portion of what is now Petroglyph National Monument, the state established a state park, Indian Petroglyph State Park, at what now is Boca Negra Canyon. And if you've been out there, you know that the facilities out there are from 1973, and not much has been done. But the area was actually managed by the city of Albuquerque, and this was the first attempt to protect the petroglyphs of the West Mesa. But it was not enough. Outside of Boca, the monument was still at risk. As the housing developments were being constructed, people needed a place to dump. Tons of trash was dumped all across the landscape. People thought it's just a wasteland out here on the West Mesa. We're just going to drive wherever we want, creating scars that are still visible today. People young and old were concerned about the future of the place. And we are so fortunate that in the early 1980s, a group of local citizens and tribal members got together and asked the city of Albuquerque to please do something to protect this place. The city of Albuquerque approached the National Park Service and said, hey, can you do a study about Petroglyph National Monument to see if it warrants inclusion in the national park system? That study was actually drafted by 1987. There was a recommendation for petroglyph, the area known as Petroglyph National Monument, to be preserved under the National Park Service. Amazingly, very quickly thereafter, by unanimous vote of Congress, will we ever see that again? I think so. The monument was designated on June 27, 1990, and we're celebrating our 35th anniversary this year of the signing of the Establishment Act of Petroglyph National Monument by President George Bush. And we very quickly changed our signs to Petroglyph National Monument. 7,200 acres of the West Mesa were designated, and to be co-managed by the city of Albuquerque and the National Park Service. First of its kind in the National Park Service to have that kind of co-management with the city. It's a very unique relationship that we continue to use today. And the purpose of the monument is to protect and promote the understanding of the petroglyphs in context with the cultural natural features of Albuquerque's West Mesa, and perpetuate the heritage of traditional communities that are connected to these places. So that we're not only out there to protect the petroglyphs and the 20,000 petroglyphs and over 350 archaeological sites. We are there to protect the cultural landscapes, the rocks, the vegetation, the wildlife, and the people who are connected, the Spanish and the tribal people who are connected to this place. We're here to promote their heritage. And that also is somewhat unique in a national park establishment legislation. But it's tough to preserve petroglyph, especially with everything that's happening in today's society. So as we celebrate the 35th anniversary, it gives us a chance to look back in time, and sorry I didn't bring any cookies, but it gives us a chance to look back in time, and since the monument was designated in 1990, look at what's occurred out there, and look at how we can improve our protection of the place. Does anybody know what this is?
It's probably Unser.
It is Unser Boulevard.
Extension of it going south.
So that's the south area by Rinconada Canyon. So after the monument was designated, Unser Boulevard, the Park Service supported the construction of Unser Boulevard. That cut through the monument. Actually, a portion as you're going up across the escarpment is within the monument boundary. How about this one?
That's Paseo del Norte.
That is Paseo del Norte. Shortly thereafter, the city came to the Park Service and said, we want to construct Paseo del Norte, and the Park Service said no. But because we had allowed Unser to be constructed across the escarpment, we really didn't have a lot of standing to protest Paseo. We still did, but then by an act of Congress, a chunk of the monument was removed from the National Monument land in order to allow Paseo del Norte to be constructed, destroying petroglyphs and severing the spiritual connectivity of this place for many of the tribal people. And since then, it's been really challenging to get the tribes re-engaged in the protection of this place when the Park Service, they feel, did not do their job to protect the escarpment at Paseo del Norte. But one of my goals is rebuilding the tribal relationship with tribal people, because that is why we are here. The relationship that they have with this land serves as a reminder that there's an enduring connection between the people and the place, which still exists today. I can't tell you how many times I'm out in the monument and I talk about why we are doing certain things out there, and people say, well, I never see anybody from the tribe out here. You're not going to. They don't come when you're there. They come at different periods. They go to different places. So just be aware, they are still here, and they are out in the monument, and we are protecting it for them. And that's why we have to take some of the drastic measures we are taking out there. Another reason that we're taking a lot of drastic measures out there is because people are discovering petroglyph. In 2020, we had over 360,000 visitors to the monument. It's the first time we broke 300,000 visitors. Realizing we don't have a lot of facilities at that time. And since that time, we've had the last 4 years over 300,000 visitors a year to the monument. So visitation continues to be higher than ever, and it'll likely continue to grow as the neighbors out on the west side decide that Petroglyph is a great place for hiking, walking your dog, and doing fitness. So our visitation continues to grow. Uh-oh. As does urban development. And, let's see, this will be a trick to see if this will work. Nothing is happening. Oh, there it goes. Oops. Try it again. There, okay. Love that people love to call things upper petroglyphs, petroglyph estates, you know, but more neighbors and developers are focusing on the west side. But we continually monitor what's going on and work with them to protect the values of the monument. And this is a map of the area in 1935, and I love this map because it shows how the monument is becoming an island on the west side. Now we're lucky we have some open space buffer. That's around us. I was talking to Janet, and she was talking about how the roads were all laid out before there was any idea that the west side would be developed, including roads that were in the monument. By the time we get to 2014, there's been a lot more development on the south area, but this whole side has filled in. And then look at this area. Now we get to 2024. We're filling it up here. This is the northern geologic window, this is the southern geologic window, and the green is the monument boundary. The whole way up to Piedras Marcadas, which is completely surrounded now, except for right here, and the whole way down to Mesa Prieta, South Point, which is surrounded now by Inspiration. There's a development going in here, and then this is all going to be developed, except for a sliver of open space land here. But growth is part of life, right? So we just get involved and we provide input on these projects, and we develop strong partnerships with neighborhood associations around us, and some developers actually come to us and ask us for our input before they even go to the city. So we're making a lot of great progress. Also, the Integrated Development Ordinance that the City of Albuquerque follows was amended last year to include tribal involvement, a great win for the tribes. Because now if something's proposed around Petroglyph National Monument, they have to send a letter, the city has to send a letter to the tribes to get their input. And they are interested, so it's really great that that was changed. For years, there was little enforcement in the monument. We had 7,200 acres and a couple rangers. They didn't get out there very much. So there were a lot of unauthorized access points from homes that were adjacent to the monument. A lot of people had stairs and they just walked wherever they felt the need to walk, because there really weren't any trails out there. But there were social trails all over the place. And we did a study in the early 2000s, and we counted more than 140 miles of social trails, which are visitor-created trails. We just had 8 miles of designated trails at that time, so 140 miles of trails was quite something that we needed to deal with. And the trails were created both by pedestrians, bicyclists, and ATVers, and motorcyclists, so we had a lot of people in the monument just kind of doing what they felt they could do. And frankly, the Park Service wasn't doing the best job protecting the monument. And why do we care? I mean, it's just the desert. There's nothing out there. That's what I hear. It's just the desert. There's nothing out there. But there's incredible habitat out there. And when you damage an area and you continue to use it, it scars very easily, but it heals very slowly. So it's important for us to preserve the desert resources, the vegetation, and the wildlife habitat out there. The other reason we care is that people were walking across the escarpment, and they were loosening the soils and they were loosening the rocks. And as soon as you do that, you create an erosion place where water goes. As soon as you create that water by the rocks get loosened and can fall off the escarpment. And we've seen that happening at Boca Negra, we've seen that happening at Piedras Marcadas. So my predecessor, Superintendent Dennis Vasquez, said we need to do something about this. And so he developed, with input from the public and input from the tribes, a visitor use management plan that was approved in 2019. And we've been implementing it ever since. And I must say, not everybody is thrilled that we are designating trails, but we're designating about 38 miles of trails. So people are going to have the opportunity to walk from Piedras Marcadas Canyon the whole way to South Point Mesa Prieta, only going outside the monument, crossing Paseo del Norte, and crossing across Boca Negra Canyon. So 2 places where you have to cross outside the monument. Otherwise, you can walk the entire 17 miles across the monument, and it's something I wouldn't do today, but it should be a really nice winter trip for people. I recommend getting dropped off and picked up.
Yeah.
And since we've designated the trails, most people do stay on the trails. Some people are a little more hard-pressed. They like to go where they go. So we've also created new signage to help people understand why they should stay on the trail and provide them with that information about the importance of petroglyph. And we've also created social trail restoration signs, and we've started restoring certain areas through both passive and active restoration. We'll get out there, we'll pile up things to kind of hide tracks, we'll sweep out, we'll throw some seed out there. The ants love it when we throw seed out there because they just eat it, but we're trying to do a lot of things to improve that environment out there. And then we've also fenced about 75% of the monument boundary and provided access at 30 locations. So we have 30 formal access points. 6 of them are what we call primary trailhead, and the rest are 24 neighborhood access points. And there's a map out on the table if you're interested in coming and out and trying some new trails. That map is really going to help you. Even though I feel really good about the implementation of the trail plan, basically it's a trail plan, there are still some challenges. For some reason during COVID, people really like to stack rocks. And this was happening across national parks across the country. We went out one day, there were 200 rock cairns that we counted and recorded that people had stacked up above the visitor center. Yeah, I don't know. Damn kids, I don't know. But rock stacking is pretty intrusive and harmful because those rocks could have been part of an archaeological site. I'm not an archaeologist. When I look at rocks, I cannot say this is an arc site. Most people that aren't archaeologists don't recognize archaeological sites because they basically look like piles of rocks. But my archaeologist at our park says, yes, they have damaged an archaeological site. So it can permanently take the value of that site for research and protection away from the site as soon as you move any rock in the monument. In fact, we had a shrine that people were moving rocks from and creating shapes. And it was such a horrific activity that we actually had to close a portion of the trail to protect that shrine at the request of Native Americans that still utilize that shrine today. And it takes a lot of work. We take down hundreds of cairns a year, and so we just ask people, and we're trying to educate people, please don't stack rocks. We still experience graffiti. Now, when it's a painted rock, we have a technique that's pretty good at removing spray paint. But when people are scratching into the rock, it makes it more of a permanent scar on the actual rock. And these rocks are basalt. They're covered with what we call desert varnish, which takes thousands of years to form. So when someone scratches a rock, it's on the landscape. And it really detracts from your visit, doesn't it? So we've worked with Dr. Matt Schmader, who is helping us develop techniques to hide the scratches. It's called inline painting, and it's a work in progress that we haven't quite figured out, but there is hope that we can remove some of these scratches. And some of these scratches are really old. They're from the 70s or 80s. Some of them are newer, and we monitor all of our sites, especially around our developed trails, to make sure we're protecting the petroglyphs. But it's horrific when you see these scratches out there. And then this is me out on the trail picking up dog poop, which is something we all do. Dog waste and dogs off leash is a continuous problem, and we actually monitor how much dog waste we pick up, and we average about 200 piles a month picking up dog waste in the monument. So that's a big deal for us, but we want to promote a positive message, so we put mutt stations out, and we have a really active bark ranger program. If you have a pup and you want to bring them out to the monument, we love having dogs walking our trail. Again, this time of year, the sand gets very hot, but bring them out to the Visitor Information Center, sign them up as a bark ranger. We can give them a little badge, take his photo. We have a Bark Ranger Hall of Fame on our website. But just be respectful and responsible dog owners. That doesn't seem that hard to me. Another really good reason to keep your dogs on a leash is because they can be a tasty snack to some of our permanent residents. And it's very sad for me when someone tells me that they lost their dog in the monument because it was off leash. It's very sad, but it does happen. We have one right now that's off leash, that's running around at volcanoes that we're trying to catch, and we can't catch it. And I get very sad because I love dogs. And then we still have trash issues. The site on the left side here, right, left side? That's an old dump that's out by Piedras Mercados Canyon, adjacent to an archaeological site. And that dump was a result of a local developer coming in. And there are tiles and asphalt and wallboard that's popping out of the landscape. We have about 5 sites left in the monument that are not as bad as this. This is definitely our worst one, but it takes years to get cleanup scheduled to do something like that. And we also have like smaller dump sites that could be historic. They have metal, they could be from the ranching community that we have to evaluate before we remove them. Lots of glass on the landscape. If you've been out to the monument, walk some of our trails, you notice that we're picking up glass, but it takes a long time to pick up thousands of pieces of glass. And then our big issue is when somebody is constructing a neighborhood next to us. That sign, that was one of the examples of it blowing in. We get trash and debris. If it's windy and people put their garbage out and it blows open, we get trash and debris. So we have a lot of active volunteers that come out and help us clean up areas. They educate the visitors who are out there. We have about 70 volunteers, which is great because we only have 2 law enforcement rangers. So having the 70 volunteers out, if you want to volunteer, I have a sign-up sheet out. If you're interested, if you love to hike, you love to walk, and love to talk to people, it's a great opportunity. They do some tracking of what's going on out there. They talk to people, they smile and give them a better experience. And we also have visitor behavior cameras out there, which I find very interesting. They're secret in secret locations, but we managed to catch one person off trail. Oh, it's not a person, but we caught this critter off trail one day, so I thought that was kind of a cool picture to show you. We're doing a lot of cleanup activities out there. It's again, our neighbors that are out there cleaning up with us. They're great people that live next to us. And then cleaning up the remaining dump sites, which is going to take a few more years. I worked on one at Sequoia, and it took the entire time I was there, 10 years, to get something cleaned up. So it's a government. We're here to help you, but we just do things really slowly. There is a sign-up sheet if you're interested in our community newsletter. It goes out quarterly, and again, we won't sell you anything. We'll just send you a newsletter. We have attended neighborhood meetings, association meetings. Our park rangers have a reading ranger program at Taylor Ranch Library. I'd love to expand. Once a month they go down there and read to kids. It's super cool. And then a lot of guided hikes, special events, and we get a lot of our volunteers from the neighborhood. So it's really, we've built a great foundation for support. And we have an education tech that works for us now, and he's developed some great programs that he takes to the local schools. He has these things called traveling trunks, and they're curriculum-based educational trunks that are about such topics as Pueblo lifestyle and wildlife and bird life, rocks, and Spanish heritage. So there's a lot of great, if you're a school teacher, get with me after this, I'll give you my card. There's a lot of great opportunities to connect with your kids. And we have about 8,000 kids that come out in the monument a year on field trips. So it's a very active partnership that we have with the local schools, the colleges. We have a college intern working for us this year and a high school intern working for us this year, so it's really cool. The park brochure is out on the desk if you have it. Brand new park brochure. It's beautiful. It took us about 3 years to develop it with Indigenous perspectives in it. So grab one of those for sure. It's very well done. And then we have audio tours out in the monument. So when you go out to Piedras Mercados, get our National Park Service app on your phone, and then you can do the audio tour and listen to our park rangers tell you the history of the place. There's one at Rinconada. It's about 2 hours long, so you have to commit at Rinconada. Shorter at Piedras Mercados, and we're developing one at Volcanoes and Boca Negra as well.
How do you get that?
The National Park Service app. So just go on your whatever app place you have. I'm not computer savvy. The App Store, right? Is that what it is? The App Store, yeah. And look for National Park Service, and there should be an app. That's also where you can find all the updated maps that are going to be online, information about special events, and lots of things that are going on in the monument. And then I'm very excited about all the research that we've been doing on the natural resource side of things. Remember, we're here not just to protect the archaeological sites and the petroglyphs, but there is an amazing amount of cool wildlife. We have a new bird list, we have a new plant list out there. We just did a bat study with some partners, and we discovered that we had a lot more diverse bats in and around the monument than we thought. So when you're out there, you'll see bats flying around. It's very cool. We're going to put that study, a summary of that study online, and we'll put some of the bat calls online. It should be pretty interesting for folks. And then we continue to patrol and monitor and try to mitigate some of the visitor impacts that are occurring with our 300,000 plus visitors out there. This is our team. Our team is there for you to support you in your visit to Petroglyph. I encourage you to come over to our Visitor Information Center. If you haven't seen the movie, it's a really cool movie. But part of the Park Service mission is to be here, protect the place for current and future generations. So we want to be here, we want to protect this place, and we work with the city staff, the city open space, to protect this place. And we have a great relationship with the city, so we continually work together to protect this place. And this year, the indigenous people are still here as well. They visit with us, they come out to the monument, they do special programs. They are connected to Petroglyph, they're connected to a lot of places across the region. And we're really excited because we're building a positive partnership with the tribal people. It's been really challenging with the history of Petroglyph and some of the disappointments that occurred in our history to rebuild those relationships with the tribal people, to get them out in the monument, to get them to help us understand the value of this place and help us understand what stories, what history they want us to share with people, because we don't share everything. They don't share everything. Some of this information that is private, and they do not share it because it's spiritually significant to them. But we ask them what we can share, and that is reflected in what I told you today. And this is something that they ask us to share with you. That they want people to know, the tourists, the people who visit the monument, that this is a place where they get their inspiration and their knowledge. They get their information from their ancestors on how to protect these places. They believe that their ancestors are still at Petroglyph. This is the reason that we want to give people the opportunity to visit it, but we want to restrict where you go. So you no longer can go everywhere on the monument. But 38 miles of trails is pretty good. You no longer can bicycle on most trails in the monument. The reason for that is because this is such a sacred place. It's like biking at a church for the tribes. And so they ask us, please do not allow bicycles. We have them in a couple places like Boca Negra, the roads, but we don't have them on very many trails at all where we allow bicycles. Because it's synonymous with biking in a cemetery. And they don't believe it's appropriate. So we really work with them closely to make sure we're doing what they want us to do to protect that monument, protect the place, protect the escarpment, so their future generations of tribal people can go out there and practice their spiritual practices. And I think we're doing an okay job. There's still work to be done, but we're hoping for many more years of protecting Petroglyph National Monument. 35 years is a big deal. It's a pretty new national monument. I'm down at El Morro, as I said. That was established in 1906.
Oh, really?
Yeah, under the Antiquities Act. So Petroglyph was actually established by legislation, and we're having our 35th anniversary event on June 28th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. There'll be a food truck. There'll be special dancers, presentations. Tribal people are going to be there displaying and selling things. And there's going to be a lot of fun that occurs that day. I think we're giving away some free stuff too if you're one of the first 100 people to attend. So it should be a really great celebration. And then I want to invite you out to the monument. We're doing an anniversary hike with a guy that knows way more than me about history and about the Indigenous connections. His name is Joseph Wexman. I think he has his PhD, but he does hikes out at Piedras Mercados Canyon. We're going to do an early one on Sunday, on the 29th at 8 a.m., meeting at the Piedras Mercados Canyon. If you haven't been out to Piedras Mercados or has it been a while, come on out. It'll be hot, but hopefully not as hot as today. And then I think I have some time for a few questions, if anyone has any questions.